Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our WORAN Land Lecture. So, as we're getting started, we'll give it a couple more minutes before we get going proper. But we're expecting quite a large number of people who've come to hear Dervilla speak in conversation with Rosemary. So, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat while we're getting started, just put who you are, where you're from, etc. Something about the weather, something about plans for the rest of the day, what else you've been up to on Ada Lovelace Day. I think we've got University of Southampton with us today, so perhaps tell us what else you've been up to today. And when we hit a magic number, which is yet to be determined by me, I'll move us on to the agenda for today. So given that I want to leave as much time as possible for Dervilla and Rosemary to share the insights with us, I think we'll probably get going and make a start. So I'll just do a few basic introductions before I hand over to Gilbert, who's president of the OR Society, and he'll introduce the land lecture and today's speakers. So thank you for joining us. I'm just going to talk you through a really brief bit of housekeeping, and then, as I said, I'll hand over to Gilbert. We want to allow plenty of time for the conversation, but there will be audience QA. And then we'll be having a further QA session with the expectation we'll close around 5:30. So we like to see people's faces, so cameras on if possible, but totally mindful that you might have other things going on this afternoon, so it may not be possible. But remember to keep yourself on mute. If you would like to ask a question, we'll be asking questions throughout. You can put them in the chat and me and Ruth will moderate those questions. Or you can, you might be invited to speak, in which case you'll come off mute to do that. If you can be clear what your name is, so we know who you are if we are introducing you. I've already said to people who joined Dead on 4 to introduce yourself in the chat, so welcome everyone. I realised I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Catherine Kent and I'm chair of the Women in OR and Analytics Network, and it's a pleasure to be here today. So let me hand over to Gilbert, who's going to give us a bit more of an introduction.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and a warm welcome to everyone on the call today. And to those of you who are members of the OR Society or the Women in OR and Analytics Networks. And a special welcome to our guests who are not members but are interested in the themes of today's event. The OR Society's Women in OR and Analytics Network aims to help women and girls to overcome barriers to full participation in OR and analytics careers through building connections, running events, and other activities. The highlight of the year is now scheduled to take place as close as possible to Ada Lovelace Day, the day for celebrating women in STEM, and has been named the Land Lecture after Professor Ailsa Land. We do have monthly online events, as I mentioned, and today is a special one. So let me say a few words about Professor Ailsa Land. Ailsa was a pioneer of OR in the UK, the first female professor of OR in Britain. She was a role model to many and also mentored a lot of people. She co-invented the branch and bound technique or model. She was the first woman to win the OR Society's most prestigious award as the Bill Medal in 2019, and this was sadly only a short time before she passed away. Let me now talk about the WORAN events and why we do them. They are all aimed to support women and also provide platform for professional interaction and networking and make women visible. WORAN events are open to everyone, no matter what sex or gender. And the WORAN Land Lecture has a specific remit to inspire, inform, and support. With a primary focus, first, we do get an eminent female speaker. Second, we focus on a topic that has particular resonance for women and for anybody who is concerned about female representation in OR and analytics. And then thirdly, to inspire, inform, and support by making women visible as role models and contributors to science, enable them to explore issues affecting women, and ensuring that women's voices are heard. It is a privilege and honor to welcome our guest, Dame Dervilla Mitchell. Her first engagement with the Oral Society arose out of her work with the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology, where she championed computational modeling. Clearly, there's a topic of great importance to the OR community. Dervilla is a hugely respected engineer who has been a role model and inspiration to many in the engineering community over recent decades. Engineering achievements include head of design management for Heathrow Terminal 5 and work on the London 2012 Olympic Village, the Portsmouth Historic Dockyard, and many more. She's currently chair of the Royal Academy of Engineering's Decarbonizing Working Group. Dervilla is also a mother of 3 and has held a number of roles in her local community. For those of you who came to last year's lecture, the format will be similar. Dervilla will explore some of the big themes arising from her career and activities in conversation with a member of the OR community. And many of you will know Rosemary, head of the people and supply chain data and analytics at Networks Group. A warm welcome to both of you, Dervilla and Rosemary, and over to you, Rosemary.
Thank you very much, Gilbert. So as you have all just heard there, Dervilla has had an eminent career in engineering, and plainly this isn't OR or analytics, which is where we're all forming a network from, but it really is one of those STEM areas, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I think you'll see some common ground and similar challenges that Dervilla's kind of faced in her career that will ring true or have resonance for us as well. And it's really fantastic to have this opportunity to hear and learn from a woman in such a senior position, regardless of what industry that was in. So as I said, we're going to cover Dervilla's career, some thoughts on climate change, the mindset and approaches that have contributed to her success, and a bit about the personal side of her life in STEM and addressing the gender imbalance as well. As Catherine said at the beginning, if you've got any questions as we go along, you can pop them into the chat, and Ruth and Catherine will help me, and we'll try and make sure that they're all covered. We might not ask them. There's a couple of points we'll pause and see if there's anything that kind of relates to the questions we've asked, but we also want to make sure that we have time to cover the other topics, and there may be things we know are going to be kind of covered later. So if we kind of then get to the end and you've got a burning question that hasn't been answered yet, there'll be a chance for both more written questions or putting your hands up, and we would really love to hear from you. So we'll get started on the conversation, Dervilla. So would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and what set you off on the path that ultimately led to your recent damehood? Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you very much. You asked me there about a path that led to my damehood, and I would start by saying that there was there wasn't a planned path. There was more, throughout my career, a voyage of discovery. And my voyage started in Ireland. I was born in Dublin. My father was an architect, so I suppose that gave me an interest early on in the built environment. But I knew I wasn't artistic or creative enough to be an architect, so I embarked on a career in engineering. So I think the things I learned along the way and why I've stayed a little bit is that I've enjoyed the teamwork. I've enjoyed the tangible product of my labor, which is buildings, and often quite large scale buildings. So I think that's the sort of very early stages. And as the years have gone by, I've been drawn more and more into it, and therefore stayed as an engineer working in the built environment.
Yeah, and I know we're going to ask you a few more questions and dig into some of that in a bit more detail, Dervilla. But just to start with, we're going to jump straight in with what I hope is an easy question for you. And I'm sure, well, maybe it's not, because I'm sure there've been many, many highlights in your career. But can you just share with us what your proudest moment to date has been?
Yeah, there is no doubt that Terminal 5 at Heathrow is the project which I am proudest of. I spent 6 years based at Heathrow working on that project. The first 2 years leading the Arab team, the second 2 years leading a wider construction team with contractors in it, and the last 2 years as head of design management, as Gilbert mentioned. And then, of course, I continued working on it. So it was a long time project. But why I'm most proud of that is the collaborative way the teams work together to produce an outcome, and the relationships we built, and many of those relationships still remain strong today, a long time after the building is opened, so that makes me proud. But, would you like me to talk about some other ones?
Yes, I was going to say, they relationships forged in a fire there.
They were relationships forged in a fire. And I often think that that's often a great way to develop relationships, where you face some really big challenge and where you have to really join together and deal with that adversity and get through it and be able to look back with pride. Yeah. And the most challenging project, which I look back with pride on, technically challenging project, was actually Portcullis House in Westminster. It was, building that new building above a tube station, which was in operation, and they were adding the Jubilee line. So hugely complicated building. And from that, I think that's the one I'm proudest of in terms of overcoming a challenging environment with colleagues and making a success of it.
And Dervilla, do you think that work on Portcullis House, how did that help set you up to succeed on Terminal 5 perhaps, or what did you learn from that helped you?
Oh, that's a very good question, because Portcullis House was the first large scale project I did. So that was, a couple of 100 million. And everything before that had been small numbers of millions. So the first thing Portcullis House gave me was an understanding of scale and how you dealt with something at bigger scale. It was also the first major project I did in the public eye. So learning how to accept there were bad press headlines and still come back to work the next day with a smile on your face and still get through the work that you had to do. So I think that I was therefore more comfortable when I went to T5. I anticipated the scale was going to be even larger, in the billions, and I anticipated criticism in the press. And the thing was to keep your head down and get on with the job.
Yeah. And was there anything else in terms of, you're just getting on with the job, but that kind of motivated you to keep going and not be too concerned about that kind of negative press maybe with Terminal 5?
I think there was a belief in the project and the need for the project, which is important to have that sort of common unifying goal or mission. And that was strongly cultivated in the Terminal 5 environment. Yeah. So we knew we were working together. But I also think the other thing that kept us going on T5 was we had a brave client who was doing things differently and enabling us to deliver something which we wouldn't have otherwise done. So there was new ways of digital working, there was new contracts, there was new and different incentive agreements and things like that. So I think the new, the novel, and the brave also kept us all the time excited in the work we were doing.
Yeah, I can reflect a little bit that myself. Like it keeps work interesting when there's something new and you're not just kind of repeating, you know, what you've just done before. And I'm really interested there where you said you had a belief, you know, you believed it was worthwhile and it kind of aligned with something that you thought was a good project to be doing. And I'm curious about like how you felt about that and maybe other construction projects in the context of climate change agenda. And also like how you've seen that change over time, perhaps for you personally and for your industry.
T5, interestingly, was one of the first projects I was involved in where people talked about, first of all, about nature. Because we were, renovating is not the right word, but all the land to the west of Heathrow is in a terrible semi-industrial state. And they were rebuilding the grasslands and enhancing the environment. So there was quite a lot of talk early on about that, although I was not involved in that. They were cleaning up the original little rivers, man-made rivers through the site and reintroducing wildlife. So again, people were talking about this, which was good to know. But in my work in the buildings, there was a very strong focus on energy usage. And if you think back to those days, there were not those escalators that now stop when they're not in use. Escalators just used to keep running. And so somebody was saying, here's this idea that saves energy. And we're going, wow, that's really interesting. So there were threads of, I think, thinking about sustainability, but it wasn't built into our ultimate ambitions in the way it would be in a project today. But I suppose that those early seeds have to be sown in whatever way they can be. Yeah. And so we saw that, but today it would be very different.
And how would it be different today? What have you seen change?
I would see today people thinking much more long-term, thinking about the life of a building, thinking about the carbon that is going to be used in the building, thinking about emissions. And so you mentioned in the introduction about, I'm involved in the National Engineering Policy Centre Decarbonization Working Group. So I now see that the role of an engineer in developing their designs is to think about how they can do it whilst decarbonizing the environment, and also how today we think about much more about humankind and nature being much more in balance, and how important nature is to create environments in which we can live well. So I don't think earlier in my career was always about design and produce a building which a client needs. It wasn't about the wider environment. So I think that's a fantastic step forward and a different way of thinking about things.
Yeah, because I think there's, I hear as a layperson, I kind of hear, well, like, there's so much climate concern with like concrete and, what the carbon that's using and the production of materials, and should you pull down an old building or leave it and renovate it? But I guess, you've got to balance that against the need of humans to have places to live and to get around, and how you balance those two needs. And I think, when you've chatted, like, how did you reconcile, for example, working on a whole new terminal that's going to enable a lot more air travel when that would be perhaps in conflict with the kind of climate agenda?
Well, I may be controversial here in saying that cows produce more greenhouse gases than aviation does. And but at the time, our ambition was to produce a new terminal for the more efficient operating of that terminal. And if you think about our connected world, that we really need connections, which, whether they're air or rail or road, to keep us as humankind connected. And many of us have family who are not right here close to us in our neighborhood, and we can't get to them by walking. Yeah. So I think connectivity is something that's quite unifying, and I think is quite important. And we also knew at the time that we were creating a new terminal that also new types of aircrafts were coming. And what we're seeing as the years go by is they're more fuel efficient. They can use biofuels. And the flight paths are changing to make them more efficient. So I think there will still be a lot of drivers to let's say, enhance the performance of aviation as an industry.
Yeah. Thank you. And I just wanted to check in, Catherine, Ruth, have there been any kind of questions on those first couple of topics yet?
There aren't any questions yet. So
Okay.
audience, do please put some into the chat if you would like to. But just can we just go? Can I ask a question? Well,
Of course you can.
well,
Ruth,
I've
go for it.
opened my mic. Is just going back, Dervilla, to the non-planned part of your career. You said because I think that was the very first question was the path
Yes.
that you talked about. Sorry, Rosemary, am I jumping ahead too fast here? Are we covering that later on?
We are going to be covering that, but I don't know what your question is.
No,
Ruth.
I'll hold on. I'll hold on to that question. I will come back to Terminal 5. And I guess it's really a difficult question to answer because you are who you are, of which your femaleness is just one part of who you are. But do you think that there is actually a difference made to the project or to even the design of Terminal 5 as a result of having women at a very senior position in the project?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to split that question into, was there a difference in the team because we've more female representation, and was there a difference in the product produced? In terms of the team, when I was heading to T5, the team was first of all made up only of men. And I was pulled up by one of my bosses at the time and said, "This is ridiculous, you need a more balanced team." And I said, "Why? Does it matter?" And he says, "You need a more balanced team, I'm telling you." And I have to say that having a good balance of men and women and people from different backgrounds and people from different countries in the team brought us different experience, different perspectives, but also women brought a caring nature for the team as a whole. And we remember we're away from our office. So providing a social and engaging environment around our work was really important. And I have to say the ladies played a strong role there. The client team had quite a lot of women in it. And they also, I think the most important thing there was they were representative of how the building would operate and understood the people who would have to operate in it. So I think it was their skills and experience in that area did mean that the design was going to work well ultimately. But I wouldn't put it down to men versus women. I put it down to diversity of experience, background, and knowledge, which led to good design decisions and outcomes.
Thanks very much. We do have another question in the chat now, which comes from the entire University of Southampton, which says, are there any concrete figures you can give about the amount of carbon reduction a modern day building provides in comparison to a building constructed 20 years ago?
I cannot give you that figure, and there's two reasons for that. One, despite being an engineer and dealing with numbers all day, I have the most awful memory for numbers. And unless I really focus on remembering number, it's gone. So I'm not reliable in terms of producing a number. But what I think happens today is nobody thought much about carbon in the early stages of my career. It just wasn't a calculation that was done. On the early stages of T5, we looked at embodied carbon in concrete versus steel. And for the structure, we were designing the superstructure of the building. They were very close. So actually cost determined. But it was another measure, not the measure at the time. Cost and time were really important. Whereas today, when people look at the design of the structure, they would be thinking about what is the carbon component of that. And it would get much greater emphasis within today's discussions and decision making. So sorry, no figures, but some understanding of how much it's changed.
And Dervilla, I work in banking, and I've seen similar, 20 years ago, just about your profit, whereas now there's a conversation about the profit and the climate, and it comes into the decision making in a way that it wouldn't have done previously. Yeah. So we were talking about kind of changes over time that we've seen there about how we kind of think about the climate, but you spent your whole career with Arup. And I was just kind of curious, is that unusual amongst your peers, and like what kept you there that whole time?
It's not surprising amongst peers of my age and around my generation in Arup. We have a habit of staying a long time in the company. And I think that's because people enjoy being part of a trust-owned, employee-owned organization. And when they're attracted to that and the culture and the environment, they tend to stay. So we've always had low turnover, high retention in the organization. But why did I stay? Well, I started out in Dublin in Arup and Partners, and then I left them to go and work in America when my husband was studying there. And when his job took him to London, I came here and I knocked on the door of Arup and Partners London, and they let me in and gave me a job. So first of all, they were welcoming to their former employees. And then over the course of the following number of years, I had 3 children. And every time it was easy enough to have maternity leave, they kept well connected to me. And it wasn't made to be a really big issue that I was going away to have children. I think they took the long view and always welcomed me back. So, you know, they gave to me, and of course I gave back with service. But ultimately, in the many years I've worked post-children, which is many more than you work before children, it is the variety of opportunities and different roles that I've had which have kept me there. So I have not had to leave the organization to get a more interesting or rewarding role. So it's been a journey with different factors at different stages.
And you've achieved, you've clearly achieved you did achieve a very senior management position at Arup. And I'm interested because, you know, there's a lot probably technical people in this audience who've kind of done a technical career and maybe have ambitions to be more senior, or maybe they'll end up in those positions. And I'm curious about what strengths you think your technical background brought to those leadership roles.
Yeah, I personally feel that my technical background has absolutely been fundamental to my success. And that's because as you grow from being a designer into, I did design management and then leading major projects, you have to be able to understand the work of your team to be able to communicate that to clients and to communities and lay people. So having an understanding of civil engineering at first, but then me having broadened it through my design management roles, I was able to speak to multiple disciplines. And so therefore I could represent the organization and the team. And when you meet a client and you're talking about these technical topics, they want to know you're strong in these topics. You're not, you know, just saying, I'll go back and talk to my friend in the business. You have to be able to talk about them.
Yeah.
And you also, there's a skill in being able to translate technical issues into lay talk, lay speak.
Yes.
And I think that role of translator between the technical team and the client becomes a very important one. So I think that's what gives you credibility as you progress.
And did you still, did you still see the need for that even as you kind of were, you know, coming up to board level? And
I did, because Arup as an organization, you know, was founded in 1946 and is probably known for things like Sydney Opera House and, you know, various famous buildings, Pompidou Centre, I think of today. And therefore we're known as civil and structural engineers. But today we have an organization with about 60 different disciplines within it. So you're actually trying to represent that breadth as a senior member of the organization. So you have to broaden your understanding to be that representational. And we actually have quite hands-on board. So we're overseeing the organization, but we quite frequently have a day job as well within the business. So we have to remain working on projects or helping out, reviewing or advising on projects at the same time. Yeah.
And do you have any regrets about, having started off qualified, as an engineer doing the technical work, but then kind of moving into management more than like the hands-on doing?
I do actually have a slight regret. I look back and because I had an interest in people and organizing the team, I got these management roles. And once you start moving away from the technical, it gets harder and harder to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 2 occasions during my career when I had bosses who made me go back and do something technical. So one was on Portcullis House, which was designing those arches, those central arches in the forecourt. And it was hugely complicated. And I really struggled when I went back to the technical. But then I was proud that I relearned some things. So I wish I had stayed longer with the technical so that it wouldn't have been so hard when I had to go back on the number of occasions I went backwards. But I think a lesson is good. Sometimes you go back to actually go forward.
Yes. And I think, did you find that when you kind of moved on from some of those technical things, that kind of opened up other doors for other things that you would enjoy as well?
Yeah. When I joined the board, which was about 10 years ago, the first thing I was offered was to be global ethics director. And I thought, goodness, this is something that perhaps I should be doing finance as a woman, and I should be doing marketing. I should be doing strong, outward-looking things. And I thought ethics was a bit of a soft touch. But I went home and talked to my husband about it. And he said, but this is absolutely fundamental to the organization and one of its aims, which is straight and honorable dealing. It's such an important thing, ethical behavior. And so I actually unexpectedly that on. And it's a role that I have really, really enjoyed in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Love to hear that. And like we've been talking a bit there about the longevity of your career, Arup, and I can't match you because I feel like this is one occasion I can say I've only been at NatWest for 24 years. But even in that time, I've seen a lot of changes, and there's been a lot of ups and downs, perhaps for me personally and for the company. But over that time, I know I've come to realize the importance of resilience in many different ways. So I'm kind of curious, Dervilla, about like what resilience means to you and what kind of part that's played in your life.
I think resilience is a word that we throw out very easily and can mean a lot of different things to different people. I think of resilience as sort of layers. First of all, at the core of it, having personal resilience. And then, we work in teams and projects. So within that wider team, having resilience, which might mean robust people, robust design. It might mean having others to rely on. So it's a different dynamic than just being personally strong. And then there's organizational resilience. I mentioned earlier that, we're a trust-owned organization, so an independent organization. And I have been questioned on other occasions, why do we make a profit or that? But we make a profit so that we can self-invest and we can pay our staff well. So that's another form of resilience. It's making the organization resilient, so it can support people's lives and livelihood. And then there's resilience at a planetary level. And that's where the focus of our work has been in recent years in shaping a better world, putting sustainability at the heart of all we do. So I try to think of it in all those 4 layers, but that each of those layers is kind of nested together, and you need all of them to be working kind of together to make the whole resilient.
And you said that resilience as a word can mean different things to different people. And then when you sort of said you've got that first layer with your own personal resilience, what does personal resilience mean to you?
To be able to bounce back from adversity, to be able to, have those unexpected things, something going wrong on a project, something difficult in your personal life, and to somehow be able to keep going and get through that.
Yes.
because I think it was you said earlier, there's ups and downs in, life is full of ups and downs. And it's to be able to manage through those, manage through life, basically.
Yeah. And I think, when we were chatting before, Dervilla, you've talked to me about like the role of like bravery and having courage. Is that kind of an aspect of resilience for you as well?
For me, that is actually really important. And I call it courage, I think, because maybe we mentioned before that I was actually a really quiet child. I couldn't speak. At university, I couldn't ask a question because I was too afraid. And what I learned over many, many years was to have the courage to do things, to have the courage to go to T5, to have the courage to go to America, to have the courage to try things. And I think I've learned over that time that you can be shy, you can be embarrassed, you can be afraid, but usually things are okay, and so I would say to other people, when they're worried about taking on something, what's the worst that could happen? And usually it's, I'll be embarrassed, So I think, courage to face things and courage to try the new, I think is really, really important. And I'm thinking today that the world in which we live is rapidly changing in the dynamics in society, in the tools with which we work. And so therefore we do need an element of courage or bravery to deal with the new all the time. It never seems to settle. So maybe it's more important today than it ever was.
And I was thinking about even those layers you were talking about, that can apply, like organizations maybe need to have courage, or teams need to have kind of courage to make decisions and do things a bit differently sometimes. Yeah. And where you said, you ask people what's the worst that could happen, maybe I'm a bit embarrassed, but maybe there's also like the flip side is like, well, what's the best that could happen? You said you were shy and afraid to put your hands up, but then you talk about Terminal 5, yet that was then turned into your most proudest moment, or kind of perhaps some of those more exciting times in your career as a result of being resilient or brave to do things.
I look back and the things that I'm now proudest of are always those things were the most challenging at the time.
Yes.
And you think, how am I going to get through it? And then once you come through it and you're out the other side, you think, I'm pleased.
Pleased, yeah. And do you think that resilience or courage is something you can develop or build on? And has that resilience always kind of come from within yourself, or has others had kind of an influence on it?
Yeah, I think in what I've said a few minutes ago, I think I've tried to demonstrate that one can build it through your experiences. And I think being thrown in the deep end is not a bad thing. You don't want to be thrown in the deep end all the time. But so I think you grow it through your experience, the breadth of your experiences, trying new and different things. But I think it's quite important that you build your resilience step by step, and that you don't have an experience which is so overwhelming that it completely sets you back. And I know people who have been in that situation, and they then run away from or change their career direction, or decide to give up work or whatever it is, move countries, whatever. So I think you must do it step by step, but you must also do it in an environment where you feel safe. And maybe that's one of the things when I talk about teamwork and the environment in Arup, it was generally very supportive, and therefore you're enabled to take those risks and to be vulnerable and to get through things. So I think the environment and the support does matter.
Yeah, and I think it's encouraging to hear that from you, Dervilla, because I think there can be, if you're feeling a bit anxious about something or your resilience is low, if it helps to have that belief that it's something you can develop. It's not something intrinsic about your personality or who you are. It's something you maybe have a little bit of control over, or you can, that can improve, or this actual positive action you can take to have more of that.
Yeah, one of the positive actions I think individuals can take. We've talked about work, and we've talked about home and the individual. But one of the ways I found to build confidence and build experience has been taking up activities and roles in my community, school governor, taking on professional committees where you put yourself in a different environment. But again, it's a safe environment because they're looking for you to contribute.
Yeah, so it's like finding those ways to build the experience in those smaller steps that's maybe not outside of work.
It's outside of work, and therefore there's less at risk sometimes. Your career is not on the line when you speak up at the committee meeting. Your skills and you're being valued for your skills and experience, which you can put to use in a different environment. So I do encourage people to think about where can they gain broader experience, knowledge, and confidence outside of their employment.
Yeah. And do you think, have you ever had like a mentor, or have there been particular sort of supporters or advisors to in your career development who've helped you get that confidence and courage?
Well, I first of all have to cite my husband, because we both started out in Dublin as engineers, so he understood what I did and what I was going to do, and has always been there to support me in my career decisions. And particularly important at times where you're spending long periods away from home. So when I worked on the Dublin Terminal 2 project, I was away 2 nights a week for weeks on end. When I was working in the Middle East, I'd be away from Sunday through to Thursday, 1 week on, 1 week off. So you need somebody to say, you can do it. You can do it physically and that, but you have the permission of the family to do it, and you have the support of the family. So I think that's very, very important. And then, of course, within the work environment, there are always role models whom you can look at and think, I'd like to have that characteristic in my work style. There are supporters. And probably the thing I've enjoyed the most are people I call discussion partners, people who you trust implicitly, and you can have an open and frank conversation with, and they will give you the sort of advice you need. So yes, plenty of those.
And I know I'm not on the chat monitoring duty, but I did just see one pop up there. It's actually kind of relevant to what we were just talking about. And it was from Nadia, and she's asking whether you've learned more from have you learned more from your successes about what works well, or more from your failures? Failures maybe is a strong word, but
I've learned more from the challenging and difficult situations than I've learned from the easy projects. Yeah. And turning challenges into successes is probably the best learning experience that there is. Hope that answers Nadia's question.
Yes. And now we're going to get on to what Ruth was asking about in terms of, having a career plan and direction. So I think it's just maybe a societal thing, or something I've felt a little bit when I've joined the corporate world was, being led to believe that to be successful, you've got to be pushing for your next move and being very upwardly ambitious. But I've also noticed we've had a few different speakers at WORAN over the last few years. And one of those common themes that seems to come out is often that people say they haven't started out with a set plan for their career, but yet they've done very well. So I'm like interested in how that's played out for you.
Yeah. So I think my early plan was just to be an engineer. I had no plans to travel, but I married and I followed my husband to America. So I think that was our plan, to do 2 years in America. Then our plan was to come to London, do a few years in London. So I would say we did have little short-term plans, but I never had a long-term plan. And in fact, I never imagined working for this long or for this stage. And there was a period in my career where I would recommit to working 1 year every September. And I would say, I'm going to work for 1 more year. I'm enjoying it. I'm going to work for 1 more year. And that actually meant I was hugely motivated going into that September every single year. And I was going to do something, and I was going to progress this project. I was going to learn something. So actually that short-term planning served me enormously well, particularly through the mid-years of my career. I never planned to be on the board. I never planned any of that sort of high-level ambition. But I've been pleased to sort of surprise myself by what's been put in front of me. And I think a key to it is being open to opportunity when it arises and taking that opportunity.
Do you think that in some ways you could have been more successful because you didn't have a plan? You haven't, if you've not got a fixed idea about where you're going, were you more adaptable to those opportunities when they came up, or the changes that were going on around you?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't have that glass, ball to look back in the world and see what if. I think I've just accepted that this has the way it has been and been surprised and pleased by it. I think it's very difficult today to have a plan also, because the world, I think I referred to earlier, is changing quite a lot around us. And perhaps we as individuals also change as we grow and develop, and perhaps our interests change. So I definitely would advocate for being more flexible and opportunistic. It worked for me. Maybe it works in our current environment today.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's interesting to hear you say that as well, in the context of the fact that you worked for the same organization for so long, because that might have been seen to be, something of the past, a secure job. But actually, that's not the case. That everything was still changing around you and changing in that organization, and being able to be ready to take advantage of opportunities. What kind of role have your networks and relationships had in helping your career? You've already kind of talked about your husband and that kind of permission to go and do things, but in a kind of that more professional world.
A number of years ago, I wouldn't have put a great credit on the networks and the people you knew, because I thought earlier on in my career, it's just the work you're doing and the work will speak for you. But what I've learned over time is that network, whether it be your community, but more importantly, your work community, they become your best advocates. So developing relationships within your business and within your broader sector, I think are really, really important, because ultimately you become known as an individual and you become known for something. So I became Dervilla, known for Terminal 5. And that positioned me, very well. And when people understand who they're dealing with it and the approach you might take, then people come to you rather than you always having to go out and seek things. And that brings with it a degree of support, and people come to you with opportunities. So I think it becomes kind of to develop your network and cultivate that and make them aware of your thinking, builds opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's like opening those doors, isn't it? It can help you with actually getting things done, but it also helps those opportunities kind of come to you.
If I could just also say in that is, one of the keys to having that sort of influence, I've talked about people knowing you and knowing what you do, but I think it's also really important to listen as well, because sometimes your ideas and your work is good, but it mightn't be its best. By listening to others, you can improve your work and you can adapt it for different situations. So I want to be clear, it's not a transmit thing, it's very much listen and learn and develop, which enables you to grow.
Yeah. And just kind of the final one on the whole kind of concept of having a plan, and maybe this is like reflects something I personally think of. Like, have you ever kind of worried about, whether you're reaching your full potential or kind of doing as much as you could have because you didn't have a plan?
No,
not
really. No, I didn't. I'm a very no regrets individual. I'm very much forward looking. I try to be positive about life and work, and there's no point in my mind. There's no point looking back and saying, I wish I'd stayed longer in America. I wished I'd taken on different projects. It just doesn't work with me as an individual.
And so it's not serving you well to kind of.
It's not serving me at all. So forward we go.
Forward we go. Brilliant. And so the next thing I was just going to ask you about was about managing your time and energy. So you've done so much in your career, like both inside the work and you kind of made mention a little about some of the things you've done outside of work as well. And so I was curious about whether you've ever had to make like difficult choices about where to spend your time, and if so, how you made them.
Yeah. When I've been doing my day job and I found myself doing either community work or being involved in professional bodies, I've always tried to align those activities. So, for example, when I was a school governor at a girls' school here in West London, and I was helping them with their development programme, they were building a £20 million development. I was helping them and giving my knowledge and skills. But what I was getting back was engagement with the girls' school, a chance to advocate for engineering, but probably primary importance was reskilling myself on project managing a £20 million project on my own. I didn't have the backing of Arab. I didn't have a team behind me. So how did I really hone my skills again? So that was back to relearning things and making sure I could be, let me say, on my game. That's not a very good expression, but
yeah.
You know, I was testing myself how well I could do that. So I think aligning things to your core job means it's not a distraction and you're cumulatively building on your experience. So learning from that. I think another dilemma might be, was it taking you away from your job as being your single focus? And I would say that building your network across the industry by being on committees, and I've done a lot of work with the Royal Academy of Engineering, helps build your network. So it helped build my network, but it also helped build my organization's presence as well. So I think that business of just aligning things is the way to make it work.
I think often you can be in that position where somebody's asking you for help and can you volunteer for this, that, or the other, and you think it's all, you know, you having to give them something, but it helps to frame it and go, well, actually, what am I learning from that? But also then to be selective about what you get involved in, because I think, you know, as kind of coming from with the question is, even actually within work, or you can be asked to do lots of things to volunteer, but also within work, can you do this and be on that committee or help with that working group or whatever it is? And if you take all of those on, you know, you're not giving the best of yourself or being able to give proper focus on the, you know, it's being selective about what you put your energy into.
I have heard this expression reading recently, side of desk.
Yes.
And I hadn't heard it quite recently. And I thought, if you find yourself within an organization doing a lot of those side of desk activities, I think that could be very distracting from your main work. But if you're really clear about your core work, and then you're adding things on the side which are aligned and support the core, then it works very well.
Yeah. And have you got any thoughts about, like, you know, how you make time for yourself as well? I guess if you do spend all your time either on your work or your voluntary stuff that's helping with your development, how do you kind of create that space for your own, I don't know, well-being or?
I think that is something that I really neglected early on in my career, because I was busy at work, I was looking after the children, I was doing stuff in my community, and I probably was leaving no time for me. And I would now say to the audience, it's really important that you don't allow yourself to be always giving and not having something that's, you know, building and refreshing you. So I eventually learned to cycle to work. Hey. No, I used to cycle into work, and there was 40 or 50 minutes every single morning and every single evening, which was just mine. And you might say it was a bit of mindlessness as well, because you have to just focus on getting home safely. You're not thinking about work, you're not thinking about the family. So I did that. I started doing a bit of gardening, you know, and I found activities that I would enjoy. And if the children were doing art projects, well, we were going to galleries on Sundays, and I can really enjoy a gallery on a Sunday afternoon. So yes, really important to find things which you can fit in for yourself.
You know, you struck a chord with me there, because I'm a great cyclist, Dervilla, and if I'm going into the office, I'm riding in, yeah. To just before we kind of get on to the kind of last big topic around kind of gender balance, I just wanted to check in, Ruth, Catherine, have there been other kind of questions that are relevant to the things we've just been discussing?
So I had a question, but I think you answered it already, because I said, was there an opportunity that you regret not taking up? And you did say you had no regrets. So I'd sort of then a separate question or reframing of the question around these opportunities. How do you spot them? Because they're not necessarily, people don't often give them to you as opportunities on a plate. You kind of, they're thereabouts. So how do you sort of spot when something's an opportunity that you should be seizing?
Trying to, so that school governor role, a little note came into Arab saying, would one of the lady engineers want to become involved with the development project at this school in West London? And I saw my colleagues going, no, 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 no. And I said, I believe in women's education. I believe in girls studying in science. Here's a school on my doorstep. If I cannot give my time to help this, then I am not worthwhile. You know, this is something one has to do. So that's one example of how things emerge, is you just see them in passing and you think that's right for me. I have taken other opportunities where I have been advised against taking them. And one of those was an extraordinarily difficult project where we had a very significant, serious numbers of £1 million loss. And I thought, do I take this on or do I not? Because it was an offer. And I had 2 people on my shoulders saying, do not take this. And I thought, this courage. Here's a project where I have technical know-how and knowledge, where I can help our business. So I was aligning things, my knowledge, our business, and the opportunity to put something right. And so I actually said, yes, I'm going to work on this project and I'm going to turn it around. And I did. And so different dynamics happen each time. But I think that aligning, what I've described in those 2 examples is aligning a personal with a business, with an outcome, and thinking that through and then working on making those successful is what led me to making decisions. And keep your eyes open because you never know what might pass, you know. And I think letting other people know that you might be interested is another thing. I'm looking for my next project. I'm looking to contribute in a certain way. I'm looking for committee work. Just putting yourself out there and telling your network that you're interested helps.
I always say that to the kind of teams of people that I lead, Dervilla, that I'm always happy to hear from them about what they might be interested in doing next or what they want to be doing, because it doesn't mean I can give them the answer now, but it means I'm open to that. When I see something that's helpful, I suddenly think, oh, I make the connection in my mind. And I think that it's the same. Actually, I hadn't really thought about saying, well, make sure your networks know that too, because it doesn't kind of all just come down to your manager.
But sometimes the things you want to do, you think you want to do, end up not being the right things for you.
Yes.
And so there's sometimes a little bit of beware what you wish for. And the T5 I turned down twice, going to T5, because I didn't understand the scale of the opportunity. And then one of the senior directors said to me, you know, if you don't take this on, you'll, you know, he didn't say you'll regret it, but he said it'll be bad for your career. He didn't say it will be really good for your career. He said, bad for your career if you don't take it. But it was one of the best things for my career. But I didn't quite see it at first because it involved me leaving Arab in central London and spending time away from Arab with no team and building a team. It was a very challenging opportunity. Yeah.
Can I just come in there? There are some questions in the chat which I think are going to be really good to pick up at the end because they're much broader. But just coming back onto this, that you've talked about taking risks and being courageous, and you've talked about networks, and you've talked about the support you've had at Arab. And what really comes across is that Arab is a culture which really supports and makes it safe for you to put yourself forward and bring and helps you to look after yourself. Now, some of the people in our audience will be lucky enough to work in similar environments, but I'm sure there are a lot who do not have that kind of support, and for whom it doesn't feel so safe because they to take chances, or the what ifs of taking chances are much worse. And I wondered if that's another area where networks, it's not just about being known, but it's also turning to your networks to help you through those difficult times. Have I interpreted right that ARUP is really a supportive place? Because the other aspect of that is what we can do to make our own teams supportive.
Yeah, I think overall ARUP is a very supportive place, and that's what has contributed to me staying as long as I have. But I wouldn't want people to think that every year is a great year. There are what I call my wilderness years. And I think if you can accept at certain stages your career does not progress, it feels lonely, you're not, you feel as though you're treading water. Sometimes they're good for your development because you can consolidate and you can take a new direction. But if one found oneself in that for a long period of time and there didn't seem to be any out, then I would really think about, is this the right place to be? And I can honestly say I've had wilderness periods, I've had consolidation periods, and I've been on one of those periods is when I took the really challenging project. I'd had a high of a number of really good projects. Then I had a number of years which were really quiet, and I was struggling to win work and find work. And then this, as I might have said, a god-awful opportunity appeared. And if I hadn't taken that opportunity, I don't think my career would have taken another shift forward. So you sometimes have to take on the non-ideal and make a success of it when you're in the doldrums.
I wondered if I had a question too, and the main thread of my question was about obviously, as it may look clearly divisive in this session, I am way much younger than the average of the other colleagues who are here, and I wanted to specifically ask you if you have any advices for someone early career like me, who spent most of his life either in a school before 18 or in universities and colleges after 18, and now for example, I'm a first year master's student. How can we expand our network specifically beyond the drawn national borders in the international environments, and as it's maybe necessary to I say it, I'm born in 2002, so most of you I assume by that time were assigned to a job or a project or whatever, and I'm very late into the field. Actually, I'm not in the field yet. I wanted to ask you if you could advise me on how to build and prosper the first supportive and second useful network to pursue both my academic goals and personal development and career goals.
Okay, I think the first thing is to think about growing your knowledge and your experience. And that can be done in the place you are and with the people who are immediately around you. So you don't have to instantly reach out internationally. You can just use what you find around you. And that's a good place to start because, you know, usually culturally you understand it, and language is usually okay, and standards and techniques are also understood. So you're working in an environment where you understand other people and they understand you. But I think that it's really important to be curious and then try to step beyond your borders. And for me, that was at first in my career in Ireland, was working in the office was my home ground, but then getting involved in my professional institution on the Young Engineers Committee. So that's where the first time I had to stand up and make a speech. That was the first time where I learned about project management skills. So you'll probably find, you know, a younger person's group and use that to then engage with people who are more experienced in areas that are in your discipline or outside your discipline. And I think that you mentioned international, you know, here are we on a call today. This would not have been really possible pre-COVID in the way it is today. So finding opportunities to connect with people overseas. Now, I don't know what your job is or where you are, how easy that is. I was lucky, I was in an organization, the ones I reached London was international, but I didn't know that until I had got quite senior.
I'm actually from Iran, and one thing that you may know is that the outsiders, as I am allowed to use that word, see us and see individuals, regular individuals like me, as someone or some people who need to be contained, who need to be banned from accessing even educational materials or scientific materials. For example, just a fresh and very, very painful example. Just 2 days ago, I received an email from the Coursera platform, which is a famous platform for learning online courses, that was essentially saying that we will ban you because we have found that you are residing in Iran, and that's against this sanction and that law and that regulation. And then I was boom, removed, banned, and all my certificates was revoked instantly. So there's a specific case for me and my fellow countrymen that we cannot do things as easily as other young people around the world could do.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear about your experience, and know that I worked with a lot of Iranian colleagues when I was in America. And so I wish you well in, you know, making your connections and moving forward. Good luck to you.
Thank you, Dervilla. And I think there were a few other kind of questions coming up in the chat, which we'll try and kind of cover at the end, but I'm keen that we also kind of cover our final question, and one of them does relate to this. So it was around that gender balance at Arup, and shift maybe the imbalance and shifting it to more balance. Yeah. And I know we've saved one of the biggest topics for last here, really, but I think we'd all love to hear a bit more about your role in helping Arup achieve a greater gender balance. I think it's 60-40 male female, if I'm right, and you know that's typically a male dominated industry, so you know it's really stand out. So yeah, what was your kind of role in helping that?
Yeah. So many years ago, I can't tell you exactly how many, we used to complain that there were too few women in the organization, and you found yourself in these small groups continually complaining. And the head of the HR took me to side at one stage and said, you know, what's the use in complaining? What are you going to do about it? So that became how I started the role of creating a women's network with others. So I wasn't the only one, but we created Connect Women. And that gave us a voice within the organization to begin to start on the gender balance discussion. And the first thing was that we didn't actually know how many women were in the organization. So this lady gave us data. So data was essential. Oh my goodness, look, here there's a few women, and there's no women, and here there's a good number. So actually getting data allowed us to present a case to the board. And they enabled us then to write a business case for diversity. And we were very lucky that we had a lot of advocates early on in the global board. You know, the most senior men in the organization. It was a totally male board till 2009. And they really supported us in developing a strategy, a business case, mentoring. But it was that my role, I think, was in creating the women's network, Connect Women, and being a role model. Yeah. Being a role model for many others.
As you are now. And did you actually set any gender balance quotas? We've had a question about what you feel about quotas when things aren't organically evolving. So did you have them at Arup or targets, and how do you feel about them in general?
Yes. Hello to UCD. I see you there. So that was one of the big debates was, would we have a target? Would we have a quota? And we eventually settled on an ambition, because none of the women wanted to be a target or a quota, but they equally realized that unless we had something to aim for, then we wouldn't move the dial, and we had to have something measurable. So we settled down eventually on the 60-40. We didn't settle that. One of our chairmen at the time said, I want the whole business to be 60-40 in 3 years' time. It actually took 7 years to actually get to that point. But you have to start with that ambition and clarity of that ambition. And it meant 60-40 across the whole company. And then it was 60-40 in each region, and 60-40 in each group, and 60-40 in each team. So gradually it's filtered down through the organization.
And you sort of mentioned there that originally the ambition was 3 years, but it took 7. I mean, even across those 7 years, was kind of progress always consistent, or did you kind of face sort of tricky challenges? I'm kind of curious how you kind of maintained your energy or morale to keep pushing for change in that area when progress maybe didn't seem like it was happening.
Progress was glacial, and that was very dispiriting. And because we were measuring it as a percentage per year, and sometimes it was 0.7% a year, and sometimes it was 1.1% a year. But once we'd made this approximately 1% a year change, we began to build confidence that we could keep going at 1% a year. And the firm has doubled in size in the last 10 years. So even though the percentages were low, the numbers were increasing. And we went from a small number of women directors to, hundreds now. So yeah, I think you've got to take the little gains and accept that they're glacial and move on with varying and different initiatives all the time to try and keep nudging the figures forward. And there's a whole variety of initiatives behind all this.
Yeah. And did you sort of said that you had to kind of step up and take action instead of kind of just complaining about it. And did you ever feel like that it was a kind of burden to have to do that as a female? You're already in the minority as the female, and now you've got to take all the action to, make a change happen.
I cannot deny that there were times when I did feel it was a burden, because every time the subject came up, it came to me or a small number of women to be the person who stood up, to be the person who would advocate. But I've described Arup to you earlier, and we're very lucky in having some fantastic male colleagues. And the first chair of our Connect Women was a man. And we did that very purposefully so that he engaged with the men to be more allies to the women and to take an active role in changing things. But I think many, many women at a senior level, the first on the board, the first on this, the first taking on different roles, they do carry a burden in doing that. And one needs to think about how you can support them through it.
Yeah. And just before we kind of come on to the, scooping up the rest of the questions in the chat and opening up a bit more, I wondered if there were any kind of, we've covered so much, but is there any kind of final tips or thoughts you wanted to share to make sure we've got your pearls of wisdom before we move on to the general questions?
I have a little tip: the newspapers. Because one of the things as a working mother and a busy person is that you can get totally bound up in your work and your family, and you kind of miss out on what's happening in the world. And one, reading the newspapers, or whether it's on your phone or on the newspaper, it opens up your mind to what's happening in the broader landscape of the world, which is really important. So you begin to see trends, you begin to have ideas. And I think it makes you much more aware of the environment in which your business is operating. And is there likely to be a downturn, or things are picking up? And then, of course, you can get joy from just reading about positive things. I read about archaeology and finding things, so you give yourself joy as well. So it sounds like a silly thing, but it takes you out of yourself to go and read the newspapers or read the news.
Yes, I'm sure all the senior people at our organisation are definitely up with the news. the key to success. Okay, Catherine, Ruth, should we kind of pick up some of the more general questions that came through on the chat?
Well, I'd love to pick up the very first question, which is actually quite potentially quite pointed, I think, from Southampton, is how do you feel about the high expectations on mothers these days? And the bit that is a bit perhaps pointed is, did your work put pressure on your relationships with your children, do you think?
Yeah. It's hard for me to judge the high expectations on mothers today, as my children are now grown up. But I think there is always judgment on working mothers. And are you doing the right thing for your children? Are you doing the right thing in your community? I think it's particularly hard when your children are at junior school and where there's a greater number of mothers at the school gate who cannot put themselves in your shoes and who feel that they are taking the right path. And I think that the way I logicked through that was making a huge contribution to the school, always baking for the cake sale, always turning up at every single school event, running the best tambola that I possibly could ever run and making £1,000. So, you have to absolutely engage with that while at the same time doing your job. And I think there's a very difficult time that I experienced when my kids were at that age, particularly my son, about 6, 7 years old. I want you at home, mummy. Why are you the only mummy who's not at the school gate? Why are you not there to give me tea each night? But I will tell you that my children all now say, Mum, we are so pleased you did not give up work and stay home with us. We're so proud, we're so delighted. So you've got to live through the expectations of your community, of your children, of your husband, of your family, and keep with it. And there were times where work and children weren't always in balance. And I would take too long to describe one of those in detail. But what I did was I always, in the school holidays, brought my children to work. Not every day, but they always saw where I went and they understood exactly where I was when I was not at home. I let them see me at work. So they eventually concluded that the only thing I did was boss people around. But they knew what I was doing, and they also met my work colleagues. So if I'd say it was Richard or John, they knew exactly who that was. So I think drawing them into it made it not only my relationship with my work, but our relationship with work. And equally, I got very close to their schools. So I got as embedded as I could be as a full-time working mum in their school lives and in their community lives. And that's the best one can do.
I love the answer, Dervilla. I think it's the most, it's an original, I think it's a different approach. It's not an approach I've heard people taking before.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Well, can I say flapjacks are your friend if you're baking cakes for the sale?
Yeah.
Shall we take Tony's question on? Sorry, Ruth.
Yep, go on.
I'm going to say, we did Tony's question. It was around the kind of learning from your project. So he asked, do you think the nature of your work doing projects kept your ideas fresh and helped you stay at Arup? Was it a learning organisation? I think you'd probably say yes from what you've told us, but
I think yes, because a lot of my work was working with architects who are creative, and I saw my job as an engineer was not just doing the calculations and delivering what they asked, but trying to really understand what was in these creative minds, what were they trying to produce, and how could I work with them to support the delivery of their ideas and their ambition. So I think the type of work definitely kept me fresh, new ideas, new thinking. The broadening of the disciplines, learning about lighting, learning about acoustics, things I hadn't studied was also, I would say, kept me fresh. And yes, I would like to think it is a learning organization, but that doesn't mean that learning is always courses or classes. I think you do an awful lot of learning just in the course of your engagement in work every day. So yeah. Yes, I think.
And I think this question is perhaps related. So Callum has asked that he's keen to hear about what keeps you motivated and whether the things that motivate you have changed over time.
I think the things that motivate you do change over time because you move through different life stages and different things become important. But things that have always been important to me, and I've mentioned it earlier, is teamwork. My father was an architect, and his office was in our house, so I saw how people work together. And I knew that was something I'd never wanted to work on my own. I always works part of a team. So, and I still, teamwork and meeting others and talking about work is vital to me. And then the behavior that goes with that's really important is collaboration. I don't enjoy a highly competitive work environment where people try to score points. I like an environment where people build on each other's ideas and take things forward. So I think there's consistencies and there's things that have changed. And as an example of something that's changed in my career, my first buildings were all just building schools, hospitals, houses. Then I got into aviation. So aviation for 3 major projects really motivated me. And now I don't do any of that. I'm working on decarbonization in the built environment. How do we decarbonize the grid? I never thought I'd be talking about these topics, but these are my passion today.
Like that subject matter has changed and you're motivated by that subject matter and the belief in the thing, but then that teamwork and collaboration has been consistent, like you said, about forging those relationships when you're working on Terminal 5 that still kind of carry you through now. It's kind of as a result of that teamwork. Yeah, Ruth, Catherine, I don't know what the next question is. Do you want to pick one?
There's from Robert, in terms of shifting the gender balance, which you said you did loads of different things, tried different things. I think Robert wants to take the short path to this and asks what levers were the most important, were the most useful, and did it feel like there were any significant missed opportunities?
I think setting the ambition, as I say, the 60-40 was really, really important. Focusing on bringing women into leadership was really important because then visibly it changed. But a mistake we made early on was drawing too many women up into leadership and not focusing on the pipeline. And then we moved towards having 50-50 male-female entry into the organization, and that rebuilt the pipeline, and we also promoted in line with the pools. So I think you learn to do new things as you go along. But I think the most fundamental thing now is to think about how do you turn these things that are initiatives into systemic changes in the organizational processes that mean you automatically hire 50% women. It doesn't have to be a new initiative. That you automatically look at your ethnicity, that you automatically think about different skills, and that you always have equal pay. And all these things have to be built into the processes and systems within the organization. And then it doesn't become something which somebody is asking for. It happens as a normal course of events. So missed opportunities is not making it into the systems quick enough.
You got some thumbs up for that, Dervilla.
Okay.
I can recognise a lot of that, Dervilla. We're working in a people analytics team at the moment, and how we sort of support our, those are trying to change that gender balance and other diversity kind of measures within the bank. And a lot of what you said about the kind of slow pace of change, or needing the data, or kind of rings true for us as well, and how you kind of embed it as a kind of culture of thinking about it rather than just, oh, it's just a box I've got to tick somewhere. Yeah. Is there any other kind of questions people want to ask that we haven't covered? I know a few people are kind of dropping off because they've got other commitments to go to, but
there is time for one more question. It'd be really nice to have one more, I guess, before Catherine closes down. But especially from a woman, because more questions from men than from women, so proportionately, massively more. So come on, any others?
Unless you count all the questions I've been asking, Ruth.
Yeah, well, that's true, and I've been adding to. If I've got time, then
a reflection before we finish, and maybe someone will come in with a question that's similar, which is about obviously a lot of us are from an OR background, whereas you're engineering, but as so much commonality came across throughout what you were saying, and particularly what resonated with me, and I saw a lot of people nodding, was this point about being able to explain the technical stuff in a very easy to understand way. And the fact that you do have to understand it to be able to give so sometimes you have to know the detail to be able to explain it in a simple and easy to digest way. So that's something that's definitely common across our professions. And I wondered whether that resonated with other people as well.
It resonated with me. I think it's one of the kind of key skills, you know, the things we see you have to kind of change as you move into kind of more leadership positions. Actually, you know, you haven't got somebody else to translate it for you, and you need to be able to understand it and speak to it. I don't know about other people's experience, but
I think you can only also make more strategic decisions if you understand the detail and the big picture. And just understanding the detail is not enough, and not understanding the big picture only is not good enough. I think it's the combination of both of those which enables you to make really good decisions. So combining.
I think there's some power in being able, or we have I don't know, I feel like people involved similar to mine in our organization have, it's almost like a responsibility to, there's a lot of people with that big picture that, you know, they need to understand some of the detail, and it's our responsibility to help transmit that bit in a way that's understood.
Great.
Any final questions? I can't see any hands up or any more kind of
there
comments,
are a lot of thank yous for a fascinating discussion.
Yes.
So
so should we kind of wrap that up there and just go into the closing slides then, or closing remarks?
I'm hoping I'll be able to share my screen again now.
But those move forward. Should we just stop and say thank you to Rosemary and?
Yeah, I have a lovely closing
Okay.
slide where I say a huge thank you, and big round of applause, either virtual hands clap, people could come off mute and clap as well. So thank you so much to Dervilla and Rosemary for speaking, and for those good questions. I feel like I've my head's full now of all that knowledge, and brilliant, lots to reflect back on. You're all very welcome to join WORAN if you're not already a member, and we'd really like your feedback to be able to run successful events going forward. So please fill in the survey, and we have 2 upcoming events, one in November and one in December, so hopefully to see you at those. But thanks again to our speakers, and thanks everyone for their time.
And thank you, Dervilla, for coming. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for listening to me, everybody. I did ask Ruth at the beginning, would there be relevant things from my experience that would be useful to share? And I think I've heard, Ruth, that yes, there were nice parallels and interesting things. So thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone.